The scorching sun beat down on the New Mexico territory like a relentless hammer as Ryder Vance squinted against the blinding glare. The year was 1876, and the rugged landscape of the Southwest stretched before him like an endless canvas of golden brush and crimson rock. He'd been riding since dawn, his trusted stallion Thunder moving at a steady pace beneath him, when he spotted something unusual on the horizon. A dark shape collapsed on the sun-baked earth. "Whoa there," he murmured, pulling gently on the reins. As Thunder slowed, Ryder's keen blue eyes narrowed. The shape was human, a woman lying motionless under the merciless midday sun. His heart hammered in his chest as he urged Thunder forward, closing the distance between them with urgent haste. Dismounting with a swift, practiced motion, Ryder rushed to the woman's side. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, with chestnut hair streaked with gold from the sun. Her face was flushed with heat, and her simple cotton dress clung to her swollen belly. She was with child, and by the looks of it, not far from her time. "Madam," Ryder called, kneeling beside her. He gently touched her shoulder, noting with relief the shallow rise and fall of her chest. "Madam, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes the color of summer sage. Confusion and fear clouded her gaze as she tried to focus on his face. "Water," she whispered, her voice as dry as the desert around them. Ryder reached for his canteen, carefully lifting her head to help her drink. "Easy now," he said softly, "not too fast." As she sipped the water, color gradually returned to her cheeks. When she tried to sit up, he noticed her grimace of pain and the protective way she cradled her belly. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "especially not in your condition." "I had no choice," she replied, her voice stronger now. "My wagon." "The wheel broke about a mile back." She gestured vaguely toward the east. "I thought I could make it to Pino's Altos on foot, but the heat." Her voice trailed off as she closed her eyes against another wave of discomfort. "What's your name, madam?" Ryder asked, already assessing how best to help her. "Hope," she answered. "Hope Winters. I'm Ryder Vance." He glanced at the sun's position, calculating. "Pino's Altos is still a good 5 miles from here. You need shade and rest before attempting that journey." He helped her to a sitting position, noting how light she felt despite her pregnancy. There was a fragility to her that stirred something protective in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. "I have a small homestead not far from here," he said. "Let me take you there, get you cooled down and fed, then I can see about your wagon." Hope hesitated, her eyes studying his face. In the harsh world of the frontier, trusting strangers could be dangerous, but something in his steady gaze, the genuine concern, perhaps seemed to reassure her. "I don't have much choice, do I?" she finally said with a weak smile. Ryder helped her to her feet, but as she tried to stand, her knees buckled. Without hesitation, he swept her into his arms, surprised again by how little she weighed. Her rounded belly pressed against his chest as he carried her to Thunder. "I'll need to ride behind you," he explained, helping her onto the saddle. "Can you hold on while I mount?" She nodded, gripping the saddle horn with white knuckles. Ryder swung up behind her, one arm securing her against him as he took the reins with his free hand. Her body was warm against his chest, her breathing still labored. "Come on now, you're almost home," he said softly, urging Thunder into motion. The words surprised him as soon as they left his mouth. His small cabin was hardly a home and certainly not hers, yet something about having her there made the word feel right on his tongue. As they rode, Hope leaned heavily against him, her strength clearly fading. "Stay with me," he urged. "Just a little farther." "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the rhythmic beat of Thunder's hooves. Ryder considered her question. 5 years in the New Mexico territory had taught him caution and self-reliance. He rarely involved himself in others' troubles. Yet he couldn't have ridden past her any more than he could have stopped breathing. "Because you need help," he answered simply. "And out here, that's reason enough." The ride to his cabin took less than 20 minutes, though it felt longer with Hope's increasingly labored breathing. His homestead came into view, a modest log cabin nestled against a backdrop of pine trees, with a small corral and lean-to stable nearby. It wasn't much, but he'd built it with his own hands, and it offered shelter from both the elements and the chaos of frontier towns. "Here we are," he said as he guided Thunder to stop before the cabin door. Hope's eyes were closed, her head lolling against his chest. Alarm shot through him as he dismounted quickly, then reached up to lift her from the saddle. Her face was alarmingly pale now, contrasting sharply with the flush of earlier. Inside the cabin, Ryder laid her gently on his bed, a simple frame with a straw-filled mattress covered in wool blankets. The interior was sparse but tidy. A table with 2 chairs, a small cook stove, shelves holding provisions and books, and a rocking chair near the fireplace. It wasn't much, but it was cool inside, the thick walls keeping out the worst of the heat. Working quickly, Ryder dampened a cloth with water from the bucket by the door and placed it on Hope's forehead. Her eyes opened at the contact, confusion giving way to recognition. "You fainted again," he explained, reaching for his canteen. "You need more water." She drank gratefully, then sank back against the pillow. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." Ryder nodded, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Rest now, I'll fix something to eat." As he moved to the stove, stoking the fire and putting on a pot of coffee, he kept glancing back at his unexpected guest. Her breathing had steadied, and some color had returned to her cheeks. The swell of her belly rose prominently under the thin cotton of her dress, reminding him of questions he hadn't yet asked. While a simple stew simmered on the stove, Ryder fetched more water from the well outside. When he returned, Hope was sitting up, her back against the wall, one hand resting protectively on her belly. "How far along are you?" he asked, setting the water bucket down. "Nearly 8 months, I think," she replied, her free hand absently stroking the curve of her stomach. "Though it's hard to be certain," Ryder nodded, pouring a cup of coffee for himself. "And the father," a shadow passed over Hope's face, her eyes dropping to her hands. "He's not in the picture." The hesitation told Ryder all he needed to know. It wasn't an uncommon story in these parts, women abandoned, left to fend for themselves in a land that showed little mercy to anyone, let alone an expectant mother alone. "Where were you headed?" he asked instead, changing the subject. "Pinos Altos," she answered. "I have a cousin there, Margaret Thornton. She runs a boarding house on the edge of town. She wrote that she could use help with the cooking and cleaning and that she'd have a place for me and the baby." Ryder nodded, ladling stew into a bowl. He'd been to Pinos Altos many times, though he preferred the solitude of his homestead to the bustle of the growing mining town. "I know of the place," he said, handing her the bowl. "It's a respectable establishment." Hope accepted the food gratefully, her stomach growling audibly at the aroma. "I've been traveling for nearly 3 weeks," she explained between bites. "From Santa Fe, the journey's been more difficult than I expected." "It's no easy trek for anyone," Ryder agreed, "let alone a woman in your condition." They ate in comfortable silence, the only sounds the occasional clink of spoons against bowls and the soft crackle of the fire. Outside, the afternoon was waning, the intense heat giving way to the cooler air of early evening. "I should go back for your wagon before dark," Ryder said as he collected their empty bowls. "You mentioned it was about a mile east of where I found you?" Hope nodded. "Yes, near a large boulder shaped like a bear's head. There's not much in it, just my trunk and some supplies, but it's all I have." "I'll find it," Ryder assured her. "You should rest while I'm gone. We can decide what to do in the morning." He gathered what he might need: rope, tools to fix a broken wheel, and headed back outside. Thunder deserved a longer rest, so he saddled his other horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Scout. Before mounting, he checked on Hope through the window. She had already fallen asleep, one hand still protectively cradling her belly. The sight stirred something in Ryder's chest, an emotion he couldn't quite name. 5 years he'd lived alone in this cabin, since returning from the war with too many nightmares and too little patience for the company of others. He'd built walls around himself as solid as those of his cabin. Yet in the span of a few hours, this woman had somehow slipped through them. Shaking his head at his own musings, Ryder mounted Scout and headed east. He found the wagon exactly where Hope had described, the left rear wheel split clean through its hub. Her horse was nowhere to be seen, likely spooked and run off when the wheel broke. The wagon itself was small, designed for a single traveler rather than a family, and sparsely loaded. A trunk was secured in the back, alongside a few crates of provisions and household items. Working methodically, Ryder examined the damage. The wheel could be repaired, but not quickly. He'd need to take it to the blacksmith in Pinos Altos. In the meantime, he could at least bring Hope's possessions back to the cabin. Loading the trunk and the most important-looking crates onto Scout proved challenging but manageable. As he secured the last rope, Ryder noticed a small leather-bound book that had fallen from the wagon. Picking it up, he saw it was a journal, the pages filled with neat, flowing script. He tucked it into his saddlebag without reading it. Everyone deserved their privacy, even stranded travelers depending on his help. The sun was setting by the time Ryder returned to the cabin, casting long shadows across the yard. Inside, Hope was awake, seated in his rocking chair by the fireplace. She looked up as he entered, her expression brightening. "You found it," she said, relief evident in her voice as she spotted her trunk. "Wheels badly damaged," Ryder explained, setting her possessions down carefully. "I'll need to take it to the smith in town, but that can wait until tomorrow." "I brought what seemed important." "Thank you," Hope said, her eyes lingering on the trunk. "Those are all my worldly possessions, not much to show for 23 years of life, I suppose." Ryder removed his hat, hanging it on a peg by the door. "Sometimes traveling light is a blessing, not a burden." Hope smiled at that, a genuine smile that transformed her face, bringing a glow to her eyes that made Ryder's breath catch unexpectedly. "That's a kind way of looking at it," she said. As night fell, they settled into an unexpectedly comfortable routine. Hope insisted on helping prepare a simple supper, moving around his small kitchen with surprising energy considering her earlier collapse. Ryder found himself watching her, noting the graceful way she moved despite her advanced pregnancy, the thoughtful tilt of her head as she measured ingredients, the soft humming under her breath as she worked. "You're staring," she said without turning around, amusement in her voice. Caught, Ryder cleared his throat. "Just making sure you don't overtax yourself," he replied, the excuse sounding weak even to his own ears. Hope turned then, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "I'm pregnant, Mr. Vance, not made of glass. I've been taking care of myself for quite some time now." "Ryder," he corrected her. "And I don't doubt your capabilities, madam, but considering I found you unconscious in the desert today, you'll forgive my concern." Her smile softened. "Hope," she said, "and yes, today was not my finest hour, but I'm feeling much better now." After supper, Ryder insisted on taking the floor, giving Hope the bed. She protested, but he was firm. "I've slept on far worse than a cabin floor," he assured her, laying out his bedroll near the fireplace. "During the war, we considered ourselves lucky to have a dry patch of ground." Hope paused in the act of turning down the bed. "You fought in the war. Which side?" "Union," Ryder answered simply, not elaborating. Those memories were best left buried, like so many of the men he'd served with. Hope seemed to sense his reluctance to discuss it further. "Well, thank you for your service," she said quietly. "And for the bed." As darkness settled completely over the cabin, the only light came from the dying embers in the fireplace, casting a warm glow over the interior. Ryder lay on his back, hands folded behind his head, listening to Hope's breathing from across the room. It had been years since he'd shared his space with anyone. The sensation was both strange and oddly comforting. "Ryder," Hope's voice came softly through the darkness, "may I ask you something?" "You may ask," he replied, a smile in his voice. "Can't promise I'll answer." Her gentle laugh floated through the darkness. "Fair enough, I was just wondering. Have you always lived alone out here?" Ryder was silent for a long moment, considering his answer. 5 years now," he finally said. "Since the war ended, came west looking for something quieter, and did you find it? Quietude?" "Most days," he answered truthfully. "Though some nights the silence gets loud in its own way." Hope was quiet for a moment, and Ryder wondered if she understood what he meant, how sometimes the absence of sound only amplified the thoughts a man tried to outrun. "I've been alone for nearly a year now," she said finally. "Ever since." Her voice trailed off, but Ryder could fill in the blank. "Since the baby's father had left her, most likely." "It takes getting used to," Ryder offered. "Being on your own." "Does it?" Hope asked, her voice smaller now. "Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever truly get used to it." Ryder had no answer for that. Instead, he said, "Try to rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out how to get you to your cousins in Pino's Altos." "Yes," she agreed, though there was something in her tone, resignation, perhaps, that made Ryder frown into the darkness. "Good night, Ryder." "Good night, Hope." Sleep came slowly to Ryder that night. his thoughts too full of the woman breathing softly across the room and the child she carried. He wondered about her story, what had brought her to this point, traveling alone and heavily pregnant across the unforgiving territory. But more than that, he wondered at his own reaction to her presence. The cabin felt different with her in it. Fuller, warmer somehow. It was a dangerous line of thinking, he knew. Hope Winters was passing through his life, not meant to linger. By this time tomorrow, she'd be safely delivered to her cousin's boarding house in Pinos Altos, and Ryder would return to the solitude he'd chosen for himself. Yet as he finally drifted toward sleep, he couldn't help but wonder if that solitude, which had seemed so necessary for so long, might now feel more like emptiness once she was gone. Morning came with the first rays of sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window. Ryder woke to the unfamiliar sound of movement in his kitchen, the gentle clink of a pot being set on the stove, the soft rustle of kindling being added to the fire. For a disorienting moment, he couldn't place the sounds. Then memory returned. Hope Winters collapsed in the desert. Hope Winters sleeping in his bed. Hope Winters now apparently making breakfast in his kitchen. He sat up, running a hand through his sleep-tousled hair, and found her watching him from across the room, a small smile playing at her lips. "I hope you don't mind," she said, gesturing to the stove where coffee was beginning to brew. "I wanted to repay your kindness somehow." Ryder shook his head, getting to his feet. "Not at all, though you didn't need to trouble yourself." "It's no trouble," Hope assured him, turning back to the task at hand. "I enjoy cooking, actually. It's one of the reasons my cousin was willing to take me on at her boarding house." As Ryder washed up outside, splashing cold well water on his face to clear the last cobwebs of sleep, he couldn't help but notice how different the morning felt. Usually he rose with the sun, ate a simple breakfast, and headed out to tend his small herd of cattle or work the vegetable plot that provided most of his food. It was a solitary routine, efficient but bare of pleasantries. Today, with the scent of coffee and frying bacon greeting him as he re-entered the cabin, the morning took on an unfamiliar warmth. "You look better today," he observed as they sat down to eat. It was true Hope's color had returned, and though she still moved with the careful consideration of a woman in her condition, the alarming weakness of the day before seemed to have passed. "I feel better," she agreed, passing him a plate of eggs and bacon. "Amazing what a good night's rest can do." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you truly. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along when you did." Ryder nodded, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. Hope's expression turned serious. "No, they wouldn't have. Not everyone is kind to a woman in my situation." Her hand moved instinctively to her belly, a protective gesture Ryder had noticed several times now. "The world can be harsh," Ryder acknowledged, "especially out here." He hesitated, then asked the question that had been on his mind since finding her. "The baby's father, he left you?" Hope's gaze dropped to her plate. "Yes and no," she said after a moment. "Harold, that was his name, he wasn't." She sighed. "We were to be married. He was a banker's son from Santa Fe. When I told him about the baby, he said we would wed immediately. But the next day, he was gone. His father sent him back east to Boston, said he wouldn't have his son's future ruined by a hasty entanglement." The bitterness in her voice was palpable. "I'm sorry," Ryder said simply. Hope shook her head as if shaking off the memory. "It's in the past now. I'm making a new start in Pinos Altos." After breakfast, Ryder hitched Thunder to the wagon that held Hope's damaged wheel. "I'll take this to the blacksmith," he explained. "With luck, he can repair it today. In the meantime, you should rest." Hope looked as though she might protest, but then nodded. "I'll tidy up here while you're gone. It's the least I can do." The ride to Pinos Altos took just over an hour. The mining town was bustling with activity, miners heading to and from the nearby diggings, merchants hawking their wares, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer providing a steady backdrop to the chaos. Ryder wasn't much for town life, preferring the quiet of his homestead, but he maintained cordial relations with most of the townspeople through his infrequent visits to sell cattle or purchase supplies. The blacksmith, a burly man named Patterson, examined the broken wheel with a critical eye. "Can fix it," he declared after a moment, "but it'll take time. Got 3 jobs ahead of this one. Might be ready by tomorrow afternoon." Ryder frowned. "Any chance of speeding that up?" There's a lady waiting on this wheel traveled all the way from Santa Fe and she's in a delicate condition. Patterson's eyebrows rose. Delicate, eh? Well, for a lady in need. He scratched his beard thoughtfully. Tell you what, I'll work on it between the other jobs. Might have it for you by sundown today. Appreciate it, Ryder said, relieved. While waiting, he decided to visit the boarding house run by Hope's cousin. It was easy enough to find a large two-story structure on the eastern edge of town, its freshly painted sign declaring it Thornton House Clean Rooms, Honest Rates. A well-tended garden surrounded the property, and lace curtains hung in the windows, giving the place a decidedly civilized air in contrast to the rougher establishments in town. A bell jingled as Ryder pushed open the front door, stepping into a well-appointed foyer. The interior was clean and tastefully decorated, with a polished wooden counter at one end and a parlor visible through an archway to the left. A woman appeared from a back room, tall and slender, with light brown hair pulled back into a severe bun. She looked to be in her mid-30s, her face pleasant enough though marked by lines of care. "Good day," she greeted him, her tone businesslike. "Are you looking for a room?" "No, madam," Ryder replied, removing his hat. "I'm looking for Margaret Thornton. Would that be you?" The woman's expression turned guarded. "It is, and you are Ryder Vance. I have news of your cousin, Hope Winters." Margaret's face immediately transformed, concern replacing caution. "Hope, has something happened? She was supposed to arrive yesterday." Ryder quickly explained the situation, finding Hope collapsed in the desert, the broken wagon wheel her current recovery at his homestead. As he spoke, Margaret's expression shifted between relief and worry. "Thank God you found her," she said when he finished. "I've been so concerned. When she didn't arrive yesterday, I feared the worst." She paused, studying Ryder's face. "And you say she's well now, the baby too?" "She seems much improved," Ryder assured her, "though I'm no doctor. I came to let you know she's safe, and that I'll bring her to town as soon as her wagon is repaired." Margaret's shoulders sagged with visible relief. "I can't thank you enough, Mr. Vance. Hope's letter, well, she didn't go into details, but I gathered she was in a difficult situation. I've been worried sick about her making the journey alone." Ryder nodded, understanding dawning. Hope hadn't just been traveling to a new opportunity, she'd been fleeing a scandal. In a place like Santa Fe, an unmarried pregnant woman would face harsh judgment, especially one who'd been publicly jilted by a banker's son. "She'll be here by tomorrow at the latest," Ryder promised. "In the meantime, is there anything she needs that I should bring back to her?" Margaret considered this, then said, "Let me pack a few things for her comfort. The room I've prepared isn't large, but it's private at the back of the house with its own entrance. I thought that would be best, given her situation." As Margaret gathered items for her cousin, Ryder took the opportunity to look around the boarding house. It was well maintained and clean, with a dining room set up to serve multiple guests and a small library off the main parlor. Through the back window, he could see a kitchen garden and a clothes line, a respectable establishment, as he'd told Hope. Yet something about the place made him uneasy. Perhaps it was the thought of Hope and her baby living in the small back room Margaret had mentioned, hidden away like a secret to be ashamed of. "Here," Margaret said, returning with a bundle. "Some toiletries, a nightgown, and a few other things to make her comfortable. And tell her not to worry about a thing. I've told everyone she's a young widow coming to help run the boarding house. No one will question it." Ryder accepted the bundle with mixed feelings. The lie was a kindness, he supposed, a way to give Hope a fresh start without the burden of scandal. Yet it struck him as wrong somehow that she should need such protection. "I'll tell her," he said simply. By the time he'd collected the repaired wheel from Patterson, who had indeed managed to fix it ahead of schedule, and made his purchases at the general store, the sun was low in the sky. Ryder decided to spend the night in town rather than risk the journey back in darkness. He took a room at the Silver Spur Saloon, one of the rougher establishments in Pinos Altos, but one that served a decent meal with its overpriced whiskey. As he ate his supper at a corner table, watching the usual saloon activities unfold around him, card games, drinking, the occasional burst of raucous laughter, Ryder found his thoughts repeatedly drifting back to his cabin, where Hope was waiting. He wondered if she was concerned by his absence, if she'd managed to find something to eat, if she was comfortable. Such concerns were unfamiliar to him after years of worrying only about himself and his livestock. "You, Vance," a voice interrupted his thoughts. Ryder looked up to find a man standing beside his table, middle-aged, well-dressed, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "I am," Ryder confirmed, instantly alert. He didn't know many people in town, certainly no one who would seek him out in a saloon. "Sheriff Thomas Wilson," the man introduced himself, extending a hand. "Mind if I join you?" Ryder gestured to the empty chair across from him, curious. "What can I do for you, Sheriff?" Wilson settled into the chair, signaling to the barkeeper for a drink before turning his attention back to Ryder. "Heard an interesting story today," he began conversationally. "About a cowboy who brought a broken wagon wheel to Patterson, saying it belonged to a lady in a delicate condition staying at his place." Ryder's jaw tightened. Small towns and their gossip. "Is there a question in there somewhere, Sheriff?" Wilson's expression remained neutral. "Just making conversation, Vance. You live alone out on that homestead of yours, don't you? Not many visitors, from what I hear." "I value my privacy," Ryder replied evenly, "but if you're asking about my current guest, I'd be happy to explain. She's Margaret Thornton's cousin, traveling from Santa Fe to help with the boarding house. Her wagon broke down yesterday, and I happened to find her before the heat did worse than make her faint. She's staying at my cabin until her wagon is repaired, at which point I'll bring her to town. Mrs. Thornton is aware of the situation." The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "That lines up with what Mrs. Thornton told me when I inquired. Just doing my duty, you understand. Young woman alone, stranger offering shelter, had to make sure everything was above board." "Understandable," Ryder acknowledged, though the implication rankled him. Wilson's drink arrived, and he took a long sip before continuing. "Mrs. Thornton says her cousin is a widow. Shame that. Young woman with a baby on the way, no husband to provide." Something in the sheriff's tone, a hint of skepticism, perhaps made Ryder wonder if Wilson suspected the truth about Hope's situation. But it wasn't his secret to confirm or deny. "Life can be cruel," he said instead. "Especially out here." The sheriff finished his drink and stood. "Well, glad to hear there's nothing untoward happening. You'll be bringing Mrs. Winters to town tomorrow, then?" "That's the plan," Ryder confirmed. Wilson nodded. "Good. Good night, Vance." As the sheriff departed, Ryder remained at his table, nursing his drink and considering the conversation. Wilson's interest seemed professional enough, ensuring the safety of a young woman, but there had been something else there too. A warning, perhaps. A reminder that in a small town like Pinos Altos, people noticed when routines changed, when strangers appeared. Ryder finished his drink and headed upstairs to his rented room. As he lay on the lumpy mattress, staring at the ceiling, he found himself thinking again of Hope, of her quiet dignity in the face of abandonment, of her determined journey across the territory to make a new life for herself and her child. He thought of the small back room awaiting her at the boarding house, and of the lie she would live under the dead husband who had never existed. And for the first time in years, Ryder Vance found himself questioning the life he had built, the solitary existence that had seemed so necessary after the war. Was it peace he had found in his isolation, or merely the absence of pain? And was that enough? Morning brought clear skies and the promise of another scorching day. Ryder ate a quick breakfast, collected the repaired wheel, and headed back to his homestead, eager to return despite knowing that his cabin would soon be empty again. As he approached his property, he saw smoke rising from the chimney, and the sight sparked an unexpected warmth in his chest. Thunder whinnied in greeting as Ryder guided the wagon into the yard, and the cabin door opened to reveal Hope standing in the doorway, one hand shading her eyes against the morning sun. "I was beginning to worry," she called as he brought the wagon to a halt. "Though I should have known a broken wheel wouldn't be fixed in an hour." Ryder dismounted, struck by how at ease she looked, as if she belonged there, framed in his doorway with the morning light catching in her hair. "Patterson worked his magic," he replied, lifting the repaired wheel from the wagon. "We can have your wagon back together and be on our way to town after breakfast." Hope's smile faltered slightly, but she nodded. "I've made hot cakes. Come in while they're hot." Inside, the cabin had been transformed. The floor was swept, the shelves organized, and wildflowers stood in a jar on the table, which was set for breakfast with mismatched but clean dishes. The scent of fresh hot cakes filled the air, alongside the rich aroma of coffee. "You've been busy," Ryder observed, washing his hands in the basin by the door. Hope shrugged, a faint flush coloring her cheeks. "I wanted to repay your kindness somehow. It's not much, but—" "It's perfect," Ryder said honestly, taking his seat at the table. He couldn't remember the last time someone had cooked for him, let alone beautified his space with flowers. The simple domesticity of it struck him as both foreign and deeply appealing. As they ate, Ryder told her about his visit to her cousin and the boarding house. "It seems like a nice place," he said carefully, watching her reaction. "Your cousin was relieved to hear you're safe. She sent some things for you." He gestured to the bundle Margaret had packed. Hope nodded, though something in her expression, a tightness around her eyes, perhaps suggested unspoken concerns. "And the town, what's it like?" "Growing," Ryder answered. "The mines are bringing in new people every day. It's rougher than Santa Fe, I imagine, but there are decent folk there. The boarding house is in a good location away from the saloons and gaming halls." "And did Margaret mention my situation?" Hope asked, her voice dropping slightly on the last word. Ryder hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "She said she's told everyone you're a widow. That no one will question it." Hope's shoulders sagged slightly, whether in relief or resignation, Ryder couldn't tell. "I suppose that's for the best," she said softly. "A fresh start." They finished breakfast in comfortable silence, then set about preparing for the journey to town. Ryder fixed the wheel while Hope packed her few belongings. By mid-morning, they were ready to depart. Hope's wagon repaired and hitched to Thunder, with Scout tied behind. As Hope climbed carefully onto the wagon seat, Ryder hesitated, suddenly reluctant to begin the journey that would end with her departure from his life. In just over a day, this woman had awakened something in him, a yearning for connection he'd thought long buried after the war. "Ready?" he asked, taking his place beside her on the seat. Hope nodded, though her hands twisted nervously in her lap. Yes. The journey to Pinos Altos was taken at an easy pace, Ryder mindful of Hope's condition and the still intense heat. They talked little, each lost in their own thoughts. Ryder found himself noticing details about her he'd missed before: the graceful curve of her neck, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when thinking, the gentle strength in her hands as they rested on her belly. As they crested the final hill before town came into view, Hope suddenly placed a hand on his arm. "Ryder, wait, please." He pulled Thunder to a stop, turning to look at her with concern. "Are you unwell?" "No, She took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his with newfound determination. "I need to tell you something before we reach town, something I should have told you yesterday." Ryder waited, sensing the importance of whatever she was about to reveal. "I wasn't entirely truthful about my situation," Hope began, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. "Harold, the baby's father, he wasn't just sent away by his father. He denied the child was his. Said I had been with other men, that I was trying to trap him into marriage with another man's child." The bitterness in her voice was raw now, unchecked. It wasn't true, of course. But in a town like Santa Fe, a man's word, especially a banker's son, carries more weight than a woman's. Ryder's jaw tightened with anger on her behalf. "That's why you left," Hope nodded. "My parents passed away 3 years ago. I had been working as a seamstress, living in a boarding house for unmarried women. When the proprietress learned of my condition, she gave me a week to leave. No respectable establishment could house an unwed mother, you see." Her laugh was hollow. "I had nowhere to go but to Margaret. She's my only living relative." "I'm sorry," Ryder said, the words inadequate for the injustice she'd faced. "Don't be," Hope replied, straightening her shoulders. "I've made my peace with it, but I wanted you to know the truth before we reached town. You've shown me such kindness, you deserved honesty in return." Ryder studied her face, the quiet dignity there, the resolve despite everything she'd endured. Without thinking, he reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers enveloping her smaller ones. "Thank you for trusting me with the truth," he said quietly, their eyes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Hope gently withdrew her hand, her gaze returning to the town now visible in the distance. "We should continue," she said softly. "Margaret will be waiting." Ryder nodded, clicking his tongue to urge Thunder forward once more. As they approached Pino's altos, he found himself searching for words, something to express the tumult of feelings her presence had stirred in him. But what could he offer her? A solitary existence on a remote homestead. She deserved more than that: stability, community, a place where she and her child would be accepted. They reached the boarding house just past noon, Margaret Thornton rushing out to greet them as the wagon pulled up before the front steps. She embraced Hope warmly, her relief evident in every line of her body. "Thank God you're safe," she exclaimed, helping Hope down from the wagon. "I've been so worried." As the cousins reunited, Ryder unloaded Hope's trunk and crates, carrying them to the small room Margaret had prepared. It was just as she had described at the back of the house, with its own entrance, simply furnished but clean and comfortable. A cradle stood in one corner, obviously newly made, a small gesture of welcome for the child who would soon arrive. When he returned to the front of the house, Hope was waiting on the porch, her expression a complex mixture of gratitude and something else: regret, perhaps. "I can't thank you enough," she said as he approached. "For everything." Ryder nodded, suddenly awkward. What was the proper farewell for a woman who had briefly entered his life yet somehow altered its course? "You'll be all right here," he said finally. "Your cousin seems kind." "She is," Hope agreed. "I'm fortunate to have her." She hesitated, then added, "Will I see you again? In town, perhaps?" "I don't come to town often," Ryder admitted. "But yes, I imagine our paths will cross." It was a weak promise, and they both knew it. Pino's altos was small enough that they would likely encounter each other eventually, but Ryder's infrequent visits meant such meetings would be rare at best. "Well then," Hope said after a moment, "goodbye, Ryder Vance, and thank you again for saving my life, both our lives," she added, her hand moving instinctively to her belly. "Goodbye, Hope," Ryder replied, tipping his hat before turning to mount his horse. As he rode away from the boarding house, Ryder felt a hollowness in his chest he couldn't quite explain. He had done the right thing, delivered Hope safely to her cousin, ensured she had a place to stay and support for when the baby came. Yet as he left Pino's altos behind, the prospect of returning to his empty cabin held none of the appeal it once had. For the next week, Ryder threw himself into work on his homestead, mending fences, tending his small herd of cattle, harvesting vegetables from his garden. But the activities that had once filled his days satisfactorily now seemed empty, mechanical. At night, he would sit in his cabin, the silence pressing in around him, and find himself thinking of Hope, wondering how she was settling in at the boarding house, if she was comfortable, if the baby was well. On the 8th day after delivering Hope to town, Ryder was splitting wood behind his cabin when he heard the approach of a horse. Setting down his axe, he moved around to the front yard, surprised to see Sheriff Wilson dismounting from his horse. "Sheriff," Ryder greeted him, wiping sweat from his brow. "What brings you out this way?" Wilson removed his hat, running a hand through his graying hair. "Thought you might want to know," he said without preamble. "Mrs. Winters took ill last night. Doctor's with her now at the boarding house, but it doesn't look good." Ryder's heart stuttered in his chest. "The baby, is it coming early?" "No," Wilson shook his head. "Fever of some kind, hit her hard and fast, according to her cousin. Mrs. Thornton sent word to me this morning, asked if I'd let you know. Seemed to think you'd want to be informed." Ryder was already moving toward the stable. "Thank you, Sheriff. I'm heading to town now." Wilson nodded, apparently unsurprised by Ryder's reaction. "I'll ride with you if you don't mind." "My deputy's holding things down, but I should get back." They rode hard, making the journey to Pino's altos in record time. As they approached the boarding house, Ryder could see activity through the window's shadows moving behind the curtains, the front door opening to admit a woman carrying what looked like fresh linens. Margaret Thornton met them at the door, her face drawn with worry. "Mr. Vance," she said, relief evident in her voice. "Thank you for coming so quickly." "How is she?" Ryder asked, removing his hat as he stepped into the foyer. "Not well," Margaret admitted, leading him through the house toward Hope's room. "The doctor says it's influenza. Her fever's dangerously high, and he's concerned about the baby, the stress on her body." She trailed off, her meaning clear. The sheriff excused himself, promising to check back later as Margaret showed Ryder to Hope's room. The space he had seen only briefly a week before was now transformed into a sick room, the window open to allow fresh air, a basin of water on the bedside table, and Hope lying pale and still beneath the covers. A man Ryder presumed to be the doctor was seated beside the bed, his expression grave as he monitored Hope's pulse. He looked up as they entered, his gaze questioning. "This is Mr. Vance," Margaret explained. "He's the one who found Hope when her wagon broke down." The doctor nodded in acknowledgement. "Dr. James Ellis," he introduced himself. "Mrs. Winters has spoken of you." Ryder barely heard him, his attention fixed on Hope. Her face was flushed with fever, her breathing labored. Even in the dim light of the room, he could see the sheen of sweat on her forehead, the unnatural brightness of her cheeks against the pallor of her skin. "How serious is it?" Ryder asked, his voice rough with concern. Dr. Ellis sighed, setting down Hope's wrist. "Quite serious, I'm afraid. The fever itself is dangerous enough, but in her condition." He glanced meaningfully at Hope's swollen belly. "If we can't bring the fever down soon, we risk losing both mother and child." Ryder's throat tightened. "What can be done?" "We're doing everything possible," the doctor assured him. "Cool compresses, willow bark tea when she's conscious enough to swallow. Prayer wouldn't hurt either," he added, not entirely joking. As if sensing their presence, Hope stirred, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment she seemed disoriented, her gaze unfocused. Then she saw Ryder, and a weak smile touched her lips. "You came," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ryder moved to the bedside, taking the chair the doctor vacated for him. "Of course I came," he said softly, taking her hand. It was alarmingly hot to the touch, confirming the severity of her fever. Hope's eyes drifted closed again, but her fingers tightened slightly around his. "I'm glad," she murmured before slipping back into a restless slumber. The doctor and Margaret withdrew to the doorway, speaking in low tones. Ryder remained at Hope's side, holding her hand, watching the rise and fall of her chest with each labored breath. Something fierce and protective rose within him, a determination that she would not face this alone, that she would survive, that her child would have a chance at life. When Margaret returned to the room, Ryder looked up. "I'm staying," he said simply, not a question but a statement of fact. Margaret nodded, as if she had expected nothing less. "I'll prepare a room for you." "No need," Ryder replied. "I'll stay right here." And stay he did, through that day and into the night. He bathed Hope's forehead with cool water, helped the doctor administer medication when she was lucid enough to swallow, and spoke to her softly when she grew restless with fever dreams. Whether she truly heard him or not, he couldn't say, but he talked nonetheless about his cattle, about the wildflowers growing near his cabin, about the clear night sky visible from his porch. "You should see it," he told her as midnight approached, his voice low and steady in the quiet room. "Stars so bright they look close enough to touch. When you're better, I'll show you." It was a promise he hadn't planned to make, yet as the words left his mouth, Ryder knew he meant them. Somehow, in the space of a few days, this woman had become important to him, not just as someone in need of help, but as someone he wanted in his life. The crisis came in the early hours of the morning. Hope's fever spiked dangerously high, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. The doctor, who had been sleeping in a chair in the corner, rushed to her side, his face grim as he checked her pulse. "We need to cool her down," he ordered, rolling up his sleeves. "Immediately." What followed was a desperate battle against the fever that threatened to claim Hope's life. They packed cool, damp cloths around her body, replaced them as they warmed, and repeated the process for hours. Margaret brewed strong willow bark tea, which they struggled to get Hope to swallow. Ryder held her hand throughout, speaking her name, willing her to fight. As dawn broke, casting pale light through the window, Hope's fever finally began to abate. The doctor, exhausted but relieved, declared the worst had passed. "She's not out of danger yet," he cautioned, "but if she continues to improve today, I believe she and the baby will pull through." Ryder sagged with relief, the fear and tension of the night catching up with him all at once. Margaret insisted he rest, and he finally agreed to lie down in the room across the hall, but only after extracting a promise that she would wake him if Hope's condition changed in any way. He slept deeply, the exhaustion of the previous 24 hours claiming him as soon as his head touched the pillow. When he woke, the sun was high in the sky. He had slept for hours. Alarmed, he quickly rose and crossed the hall to Hope's room, fearing the worst. Instead, he found her awake, propped up slightly against her pillows, her color much improved though she still looked weak. Her eyes brightened when she saw him in the doorway. "There you are," she said, her voice hoarse but stronger than before. "Margaret said you stayed all night." Ryder moved to her bedside, relief washing over him. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle," Hope admitted with a small smile. "But better than yesterday, I'm told. The doctor says the fever has broken." "It has," Margaret confirmed, entering the room with a tray bearing a bowl of broth. "Though you still need rest and nourishment to recover your strength." She set the tray on the bedside table, then turned to Ryder. "You should eat something too, there's stew in the kitchen." After ensuring Hope was comfortable and able to manage the broth, Ryder followed Margaret to the kitchen. The boarding house was quiet, the other guests presumably out for the day. "Thank you for sending word," Ryder said as Margaret ladled stew into a bowl for him, "and for letting me stay." Margaret studied him thoughtfully. "It was Hope who asked for you when she was lucid enough to speak. She's talked about you quite a bit since arriving." Ryder didn't know how to respond to that, so he focused on his stew instead. After a moment, Margaret continued. "My cousin has had a difficult time of it," she said quietly. "What that man did to her in Santa Fe, well, it would have broken many women, but not Hope. She's stronger than she looks." "I've noticed," Ryder agreed. Margaret hesitated, then added, "She'll need that strength in the coming months." An unmarried mother, even one posing as a widow, faces many challenges. "She won't be alone," Ryder said firmly. "She has you." "Yes," Margaret agreed, her gaze steady on his face, "but perhaps she could have more than just me." The implication hung in the air between them. Ryder set down his spoon, meeting Margaret's eyes directly. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mrs. Thornton?" "Nothing improper," she assured him. "Merely an observation that you seem to care for my cousin, perhaps more than you realize. And that such care might be welcome, should you choose to offer it." Before Ryder could formulate a response, they were interrupted by Dr. Ellis entering the kitchen. "Mrs. Winters is asking for you, Mr. Vance," he said. "She's quite insistent despite my advice that she rest." Ryder rose immediately, nodding his thanks to Margaret for the meal before following the doctor back to Hope's room. He found her sitting more upright than before, a stubborn set to her jaw that spoke of determination despite her weakness. "The doctor says I need to rest," she said as Ryder entered. "But I needed to thank you first for coming when Margaret sent word, for staying through the night." "No need for thanks," Ryder replied, taking the chair beside her bed. "I'm just glad you're recovering." Hope smiled, though the effort seemed to tire her. "Dr. Ellis says the baby is fine. Apparently this little one is as stubborn as its mother." "Good," Ryder said, relieved. "That's good." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sounds of the town beyond the window, the creak of wagon wheels, the occasional shout, a dog barking. "I missed you," Hope said suddenly, her eyes meeting his with surprising directness. "This past week. The boarding house is lovely and Margaret has been so kind, but—" She hesitated, her hand moving unconsciously to her belly. "I found myself thinking of your cabin, of how peaceful it was there." Ryder's heart quickened at her words. "I missed you too," he admitted, the truth of it surprising him even as he spoke. "The cabin's been quiet without you." "Quietude," Hope murmured, a small smile playing at her lips. "Isn't that what you said you came west looking for?" "I thought so," Ryder replied honestly. "Now I'm not so sure." Hope's expression softened, understanding dawning in her eyes. "What are you sure of, Ryder?" It was a simple question, yet it demanded an honesty Ryder had rarely allowed himself. He looked at her, this woman who had entered his life so unexpectedly, who had faced abandonment and scandal with quiet dignity, who had nearly died but fought her way back and found clarity where there had been only confusion. "That I don't want to return to an empty cabin," he said finally. "That in just a few days you changed something in me I thought couldn't be changed. That I'd like to see where this path leads if you're willing to walk it with me." Hope's eyes widened, a flush that had nothing to do with fever coloring her cheeks. "Ryder, I don't know what to say." "You hardly know me." "I know enough," he countered gently. "I know you're brave and kind. I know you face the world with grace, even when it's been cruel to you. I know that in all the years since the war, I've never felt as alive as I have since meeting you." Tears gathered in Hope's eyes, though her smile remained steady. "And the baby?" she asked softly. Another man's child, a child who deserves love, Ryder replied without hesitation. Just as its mother does. Hope reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. I won't pretend this isn't what I've hoped for, she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. But are you certain people will talk? Let them, Ryder said simply. I've never much cared for other people's opinions. A soft laugh escaped Hope, bright and genuine despite her weakened state. No, I don't imagine you have. She squeezed his hand, her expression growing serious once more. I need time to recover to think. It's more than I ever expected. Take all the time you need, Ryder assured her. I'm not going anywhere, and he didn't, not for long anyway. Over the next week, as Hope gradually regained her strength, Ryder split his time between her bedside and his homestead, riding back and forth each day to tend his cattle and maintain the cabin. The frequent journeys were tiring but necessary not only for the sake of his livestock, but also to prepare his home for what he hoped would be new occupants. He expanded the vegetable garden, reinforced the corral fencing, and began work on an addition to the cabin, a second room that would serve as a nursery. The work was demanding, especially with the summer heat still intense, but Ryder found satisfaction in each nail driven, each board secured. He was building not just an addition, but a future. In town, rumors inevitably spread. The solitary rancher's sudden interest in the boarding house and its pregnant resident did not go unnoticed. Some whispers were unkind, questioning Hope's virtue despite the widow story. Others were more sympathetic, suggesting that Ryder's intervention might have been providential for a woman in such circumstances. Ryder ignored the gossip, his focus solely on Hope's recovery and the decision that lay before her. He didn't press her for an answer, understanding that what he was proposing, taking on another man's child, facing potential scandal, was no small matter. Instead, he simply made himself present, reliable, a steady force in her increasingly chaotic world. As her strength returned, Hope began taking short walks in the boarding house garden, Ryder at her side. On one such afternoon, 2 weeks after her fever had broken, she paused beside a flowering rosebush, her expression thoughtful. I've been thinking about your offer, she said, her hand resting on her now prominent belly. The baby was due in just over a month, according to Dr. Ellis's estimation. And, Ryder prompted gently when she didn't continue. Hope turned to face him, sunlight catching in her hair and turning it to spun gold. I'm afraid, she admitted. Not of you, but of what might happen. What if the baby comes and you find you can't love it as your own? What if the gossip becomes too much to bear? What if Hope, Ryder interrupted, taking both her hands in his. I can't promise the future holds no challenges, but I can promise that whatever comes, we'll face it together, if you'll have me. She searched his face as if looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation. Finding none, she took a deep breath. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I'll have you. The word, that single affirmative syllable, seemed to hang in the air between them, transforming the garden, the day, the future that stretched before them. Without thinking, Ryder pulled her gently to him and kissed her their first kiss, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they parted, Hope's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I never expected this, she whispered. To find you here at the end of everything I thought I knew. Not the end, Ryder corrected her softly. A beginning. They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony performed by the local preacher. Margaret Thornton stood as witness, her approval evident in her tearful smile. The couple had decided on a quick wedding, partly due to Hope's advanced pregnancy, but mostly because, having found each other, neither saw reason to wait. The ceremony took place in the boarding house parlor, Hope wearing a pale blue dress Margaret had helped alter to accommodate her condition, a bouquet of wildflowers from Ryder's homestead in her hands. As they spoke their vows, Ryder was struck by the certainty that filled him, a peace he hadn't known since before the war, perhaps ever. I now pronounce you man and wife, the preacher declared, and just like that, Ryder Vance was no longer alone. They spent their first night as husband and wife at the boarding house, Margaret having tactfully arranged for the other guests to dine out that evening. Despite Hope's advancing pregnancy and still recovering strength, there was a sweetness to their wedding night that neither would ever forget, a tender exploration of newfound intimacy, a physical expression of the bond that had formed between them so unexpectedly. The following day, Ryder brought Hope home to his cabin, their cabin now. She gasped with delight when she saw the addition he had begun building, tears filling her eyes as she realized what it meant. "You were that sure I'd say yes?" she asked, turning to him with a smile that outshone the sun. "Hopeful," he corrected, drawing her into his arms. "Not sure." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity as they settled into life together. Hope transformed the cabin's interior, adding small touches that made the space truly a home: curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt on their bed, the wildflowers she gathered each morning arranged in jars on the table. Ryder continued work on the nursery, determined to have it completed before the baby arrived. They developed routines, learning each other's habits and preferences. Ryder discovered Hope's love of reading and began bringing her books from his infrequent trips to town. Hope learned that Ryder preferred coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in and that he whistled tunelessly while doing chores outside. Small revelations, everyday moments that wove the fabric of their shared life. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the New Mexico sky in spectacular hues of orange and pink. Hope would often guide Ryder's hand to her belly, allowing him to feel the baby's movement's strong kicks and turns that never failed to fill him with wonder. "He's going to be a fighter," Ryder remarked one evening as a particularly vigorous kick made Hope wince, or she, Hope reminded him, smiling. "Though I do think it's a boy. Something about the way I'm carrying, Margaret says. Boy or girl doesn't matter," Ryder said honestly. "As long as you're both healthy." Hope leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice soft in the gathering dusk. "I used to be so afraid, thinking about the baby coming, doing it all alone. Now I can't wait to meet him or her and begin our life as a family." "A family," Ryder echoed, the word still new and wondrous on his tongue. After years of solitude, the concept of family had seemed as remote as the stars above. Now it was within reach, nearly tangible. The baby came 2 weeks later on a crisp September morning as dawn was breaking over the eastern hills. Hope woke Ryder with a hand on his shoulder, her voice calm despite the circumstances. "It's time," she said simply. Ryder was instantly alert, the plans they'd discussed springing to mind. He helped Hope to a comfortable position, placed fresh water to boil on the stove, then rode hard for town to fetch Dr. Ellis. The doctor had been expecting the summons and was ready, his bag packed with necessary supplies. By the time they returned to the cabin, Hope's labor had progressed significantly. The next few hours were a blur of activity, with Ryder alternating between supporting Hope through increasingly painful contractions and following the doctor's instructions. Just after midday, as sunlight streamed through the cabin windows, the cry of a newborn filled the air. Ryder, holding Hope's hand as she gave one final push, felt his heart stop and then restart at the sound. "A boy," Dr. Ellis announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A strong, healthy boy." Hope collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted but radiant. "Let me see him," she whispered. The doctor cleaned and wrapped the baby before placing him in Hope's waiting arms. Ryder stood beside them, overwhelmed by the sight of his wife cradling their son, for that was how he thought of the child, regardless of blood. "He's perfect," Hope murmured, tracing a gentle finger over the baby's flushed cheek. "Absolutely perfect." Ryder could only nod, words inadequate for the emotion swelling in his chest. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he briefly opened his eyes, they were the deep blue of all newborns. His tiny fists waved in the air, as if declaring his arrival to the world. "What shall we call him?" Hope asked, looking up at Ryder with eyes bright despite her exhaustion. They had discussed names but had not settled on one, wanting to meet the child first. Now, looking at the boy's strong features and determined expression, Ryder knew. "Samuel," he suggested. "It means heard by God." Hope's smile widened. "Samuel Vance," she tested the name, nodding her approval. "It's perfect. Would you like to hold your son, Mr. Vance?" With trembling hands, Ryder accepted the bundled infant, cradling him close to his chest. Samuel squirmed slightly before settling, his tiny face relaxing in sleep. In that moment, looking down at the child in his arms, Ryder felt the last of his doubts vanish. This was his son in every way that mattered. "Hello, Samuel," he whispered. "Welcome home." The days and weeks that followed were a mixture of joy and exhaustion as they adjusted to life with a newborn. Samuel proved to be a strong, healthy baby with a hearty appetite and powerful lungs. Hope recovered well from the birth, though Ryder insisted she rest as much as possible, taking on many of the household duties himself in addition to caring for the livestock. Margaret visited from town, bearing gifts for the baby and helping Hope adjust to motherhood. Dr. Ellis checked on both mother and child regularly, pronouncing them both to be thriving. Even Sheriff Wilson made an appearance, awkwardly presenting a hand-carved wooden horse for when the boy's older. As autumn deepened toward winter, the small family settled into new routines. The nursery was completed, though for now Samuel slept in a cradle beside their bed, neither parent quite ready to have him far from reach. Ryder found unexpected joy in the simple tasks of fatherhood, changing and bathing the baby, walking the floor with him during fussy nights, watching his small face as he slept. One evening, as the first snow of the season dusted the landscape outside, Ryder sat in the rocking chair before the fire, Samuel sleeping contentedly on his chest. Hope, working on mending nearby, looked up to find her husband gazing at their son with such tenderness it made her heart ache. "Penny for your thoughts," she said softly, setting aside her sewing. Ryder smiled, his hand gently patting Samuel's back. "I was just thinking about the day we met, finding you out there in the desert, not knowing how completely you would change my life." "For the better, I hope," Hope replied, moving to kneel beside the rocking chair. "In ways I never imagined possible," Ryder assured her, reaching with his free hand to touch her cheek. "I came west looking for peace, thinking solitude was the answer. But real peace was finding you, building this family." Hope leaned into his touch, her eyes bright with emotion. "When you found me that day, when you said, 'Come on now, you're almost home,' I had no idea how true those words would become. That you were leading me not just to shelter, but to where I truly belonged." Ryder bent to kiss her, a gentle press of lips that conveyed all the love words could not express. Samuel stirred between them, making a soft sound before settling again, secure in the embrace of the father who had chosen him. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the New Mexico landscape in pristine white. Inside, the fire crackled, casting golden light over the small family gathered before it. Ryder Vance, once solitary by choice, now surrounded by the love he hadn't known he was seeking, felt a contentment so complete it seemed to fill every corner of the cabin. This was home, not the structure of wood and stone he had built with his hands, but the life he and Hope were creating together, day by day. A life born from chance encounter, nurtured by compassion, and now flourishing in love. As Samuel's tiny hand wrapped around his finger with surprising strength, Ryder made a silent promise to protect this family they had formed, to love this child as his own, to cherish the woman who had brought such unexpected joy into his life. The path ahead would not always be smooth. Life in the territory ensured that, but they would walk it together. This family forged not by blood, but by choice, by love, by the grace of second chances. And in the years to come, as their family grew and changed with the arrival of a daughter 2 years later, then twins after that, as the homestead expanded and prospered, Ryder would often think back to that fateful day under the merciless sun, when he'd found a woman in need and spoken words that had proven prophetic. "Come on now, you're almost home."